Now, into B, the communication plan, and that's to be introduced by Mr. Philip Cooper, Communications Manager. And the purpose is to present for Council's approval a communication plan outlining the goals, objectives, and actions that will be introduced in 2013 through 2015 to assist the City of Nanaimo in connecting with its citizens. Mr. Cooper?
Thank you very much. So what I'll do over the next couple of minutes is provide an overview of the communication plan that has been prepared and that is before you tonight for approval. The first thing I want to discuss is when you're looking at how to create a communication plan for the first time for a city like Nanaimo, there are a number of different paths that you can take and lots of different options that are available. One of the things you need to look at is what is the current makeup and structure of the city, what sort of resources does it have access to, and what kind of issues is it dealing with on a regular basis. So these are all the things that I considered when I put this plan together, and as I began the process of sharing it with staff, with yourselves, with the community, I was getting feedback and direction around whether I was on the mark and whether it was something that was going to fit. So I think tonight what you have is a document that reflects where we can go, and it's something that, of course, as I've said right in the opening sentence, it's a living document. So this is a plan that can be changed and modified as we receive feedback, as we move in new directions. It's something that can be changed on a regular basis. So the plan addresses a number of needs. I've identified three that I'll just go through right now. The first one is the need for information. As an organization, our goal is to put information out, but it's also to hear back what our community members are saying. So information goes in both directions, and this document is designed to support that transfer out and that transfer in. Secondly, it supports the notion of openness. There's a requirement in any organization in the public sector nowadays to be very conscious about how it does business, how it goes about making decisions, and this document supports that notion of openness, or is often used the word transparency, but it's a document designed to demonstrate what we're doing, how we're doing it, and create an opportunity for conversations and dialogue to occur. And the third item I want to stress is it recognizes the need for a diversity of channels by which that information can be shared. So the evolution of how corporate communications works, how information is shared, there are lots of different channels nowadays that you can use and access. And we want to have a document and an organization that's using different methods to both be heard as well as to get information out and, of course, listen to what's coming in. The document itself was prepared November through December of 2012, and it then moved into a period of feedback, primarily internally at that point, and that occurred January through February. And then at the beginning of March, it was made available for the public. I presented to you, I think it was March 3rd, the draft document, and I went through some of the learnings at that stage. And then it was made available on the city website for feedback and comment. Through that process, a number of changes were made to the document. One of the things that really stood out, and it was interesting actually, when you work on a document like this, you sometimes get into the mode of thinking in a certain direction, and you draw some conclusions around this reflects what I'm hearing. One of the intents of this document, as I've said already, is to demonstrate that the city wishes to listen to what the public is saying. And some of the most interesting pieces of feedback I received was, you're not hitting that nail on the head. So an effort was made to strengthen up the notion that the city is very interested in hearing what people have to say, and that there are methods and mechanisms in place to allow that to occur. We also had some great feedback around what does this mean, or what does this look like? So there was an opportunity to provide clarity around some of the actions and some of the outcomes that this document could occur. It is in many ways a document that someone like myself would look at on a regular basis. So unless you're tied up in the world that I'm in, there's often a requirement to explain things to a finer level of detail than perhaps what the document would otherwise interpret or provide as information. So I put it out tonight. If anyone ever has any questions on what's contained in this document, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with them about what the different parts of it mean. The document is a deliverable of the strategic plan. This is an important document at a high level, and the communication plan tucks in just underneath it. So there's some direct lines to the corporate strategic plan in terms of how it is designed to support the initiatives and priorities. The specific one in particular is taking responsibility to be an excellent municipal government. So the document is directly aligned with that priority. The document itself is divided into 4 goals. The first one promotes external communication. The second one is internal communication. The third goal is public participation, and the fourth goal is relationship building. Some of the feedback I received was against the notion of internal communication, and some of the questions were, well, why do you have an entire section on internal communications? I mean, you should be getting the word out and hearing what people are saying. And my answer to that is quite clear. You need to think of a communication plan as something that's going to support a culture, an organization that's effective in thinking and preparing to get a message out. And that's often done internally. If you think of the analogy of a house, you can look at it from the outside and it looks very strong and very well built, but it's all the internal components that really make it a sound building and a desirable place to live. So this document strengthens the notion of internal communication, because that's how we will effectively work as a team and talk to one another and plan with one another to effectively assist people in understanding what we're doing, and at the same time be open and available to hearing about what's taking place across the community. So internal communications is a key initial bench point for us to get some strength. The document is also based on a 4-part principled approach, and it contains 60 different actions, and those actions would be probably developed further in a different type of document, which I'll describe in a minute, into actual deliverables and in some cases tactics. There's another document that's currently in the works, and that's the governance review. And the governance review is an important document to keep in mind when thinking about corporate communications, because it's the policy and process side of the business. So while this document allows for a number of opportunities to improve upon how messages are created and how conversations occur and how the public is heard, the governance review also has a number of outcomes which will support effective communications for the City of Nanaimo. Now, this particular document, and this perhaps goes back to my first point, what type of document do we want to have? What sort of approach do we want to take? And what I landed on was an intent to really create an organizational culture that supports the communication process. And when you look at what we're doing currently, there's a tremendous amount of conversations occurring, a tremendous amount of decisions being made around communications. And those are things that people look at and say, okay, there's some results happening. But what we want to do through this document is strengthen that internal culture and get people thinking in a very proactive sense about the communication function, get them prepared, planning, and ready to get messages out, to listen to what people are saying, and to be very on top of what's taking place. So that's done by looking at our organizational culture. So in many ways, this document is about changing organizational culture, to which communications is actually a byproduct. So I'll state that again. This is an organizational culture document to which communications is an effective byproduct. And I think that's a great place for us to start. We're not going to have fantastic successes right out of the gate. This will take time to really move our organization forward to a place where people are saying to us, hey, you know, you're doing a fantastic job with your communications, and we're seeing some good results in terms of people being gotten back to, or conversations that are occurring that are on an effective basis. Some final points I'd like to make, and this is perhaps related to my role. Since I was brought on board in September of 2012, there's been quite a bit of discussion on occasion around the function that I'm in. And I want to make it understood that my role as the communication manager is to really manage a communication function for the city. I don't have a specific role as the city spokesperson. That does on occasion come up. And it's important for people to understand that this document facilitates multitudes of spokespeople. These are people that are in positions where they are subject matter experts, and they're very well versed on answering questions and getting information out to the public on what's taking place. At the same time, you as members of council, and the mayor in particular, are often the dedicated spokespeople that speak directly to the media on issues that are important. So my role is really in one way a support role. It's also a planning role, and it's a facilitator role. I do act as a spokesperson, but that wouldn't be something I would identify myself with as first. Secondly, I have on occasion come across comments inquiring as to where I am, and in some cases this has been printed in the local media, and there's some fun to that, but the reality is I'm at my desk, I'm at my job every day, and I'm available to talk to the community and hear what they're saying. It's really important that if we're going to proceed forward with this function, that we recognize that all staff are here to get a message out and to communicate in the best possible way, and that also applies to myself. So if you have any questions, by all means, and I'm referring this now back to the public, you're welcome to email me, call me, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you and have a conversation about what we're doing and what I'm doing to help improve the communications for the City of Nanaimo. Now, this particular document creates a number of targeted plans, and within the hierarchy of communication plan, you have a corporate plan such as the one that I brought forward tonight. You also have department plans, event plans, and in some cases program plans. Each of those plans has a series of events and opportunities to communicate on behalf of something, the organization or an event or a program, and those are all outcomes of this document itself. So what you have before you tonight is a fairly high-level document. It's designed to establish principles and priorities and actions. There's a lot of detail that would actually come out of other documents, and some of the feedback that I received was fantastic, but it actually can be applied at a department level, the department plan level. And that's one of the things that this document talks about, is creating department communication plans, and that would be a next step for myself. In terms of communications in general, I just want to touch on 4 different categories, because in the conversation that often takes place around communications, there's this sense that communications is this single identity or single thing that is either identified as being done well or done poorly. Well, there's actually 4 different types I'd like to point out. And in particular, there's one type that this document is very specifically directed towards, and that's operational communication. That's the day-to-day business reality of how the city goes about doing its business and having a supported communication function. And when handled very, very effectively, it actually influences the next 3 items. When handled poorly, it also influences the next 3 items. So the second item to which this plan does support is emergency communications. So anyone who's been following the activities in Calgary over the last several weeks, that's an example of emergency communications. Those people are working often in a very reactive state and making decisions on the fly, and there's very little public consultation occurring there. There's a lot of public feedback, but there's a lot of decisions being made around circumstances that are before them. So this document supports the communication emergency management function, and there's references in there to that. The next item that I want to identify specifically is issues-based communications. Issues-based communications is also in a league of its own. It's a very, in many cases, a reactive type of communications, but when done effectively through organizational communications, it can be proactive. So this plan does its best to identify ways in which we can be proactive in managing the issues that come before us. But issues themselves are always challenging, they're always problematic, and they always create a dialogue in the community and coverage in the community, which in itself is rather challenging and doesn't always put the city in the best possible light. So I just want to identify issues-based communications as an item that this plan touches on, but it's something that's quite challenging. The last item is political communication, and this, of course, is conversations between different levels of government and yourselves, and it's a kind of conversation to which this plan will support by providing information, background, briefings, but ultimately the world of political communications falls to politicians, and while this document is designed to support that, it's not necessarily about communications. This document also supports issues management, but it's not entirely an issues management communication plan. It also supports emergency management, but it's not necessarily specifically an emergency management plan. It is an operational communication plan. It probably dedicates 80% of its actions on operational communications. The last point I want to just touch on briefly here is that the document does have a component which supports measurement. You're never going to be successful unless you take an effort to measure what you're doing. So there's a section in there that it's under the principles actually about measuring what you're doing. And that's something that I'll be doing on a regular basis, is seeking out ways in which we can get feedback on how we're doing, how our messages are being received, whether people think that we're listening, and what sort of results we're getting. So on that note, I'll pass it back to the Mayor, and I'm happy to take any questions on the document.